He was a German pastor who became part of the resistance to the growing power of Hitler. He formed underground secret seminaries to teach and train those who were wanting to grow in their faith, even such through a tumultuous time. But through this, he came under suspicion. And under the watchful eye of the Nazis, they forbid him to ever speak in public again. This did not sway Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who held such staunch opposition to the Nazi dictatorship, continuing to speak out to Hitler's euthanasia program, an atrocious genocide that was taking place of all the Jews. And finally, of course, that day came when he was arrested and thrown in prison, where he would stay there for 1.5 years, ultimately then being transferred to the Flossenburg concentration camp. False accusations were thrown at him in an attempt of his attempt to assassinate Hitler, and this would lead him to a very quick trial and was sentenced to death. Remarkably, it was only 21 days before Hitler himself would commit suicide, and the war would be known as over. That day, as he left the prison cell, he said to a friend, "This is the end. But for me, it's the very beginning." Bonhoeffer, he was stripped naked and led through the courtyard where he was hung with several others. An observer of this wrote, "I saw Pastor Bonhoeffer kneeling on the floor, praying fervently to God. And I was most moved by the way that this lovable man prayed, so devout, so certain that God heard his prayers. At the place of execution, he again said a short prayer and then climbed to the steps to the gallows, very brave and composed. His death took just seconds. And in almost the 40 years that I have been a doctor," this man said, "I have hardly ever seen a man die so entirely submissive to the will of God." Bonhoeffer's life and his writings on faith within the secular world, they have become highly influential. And his book, that is known and called The Cost of Discipleship, is known as a modern classic today. Jim Elliot, a martyr in the 50s by the hands of the cannibal tribe in Central America, wrote, "He is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose." Persecution of Jesus' followers has been happening since he's walked this earth. It has not relented. It has never stopped. And even today, across the globe, hundreds are being persecuted and killed for their faith in this man called Jesus. Jesus, who forewarned of this over and over within his teachings and landed as well within the Beatitudes. As I grappled with this very broad topic, it's really quite broad, I kept going back to one thing. It's the need of our mindset to have the determination to follow Jesus no matter what. That's what's needed. Do I have the thinking to follow Jesus despite what I encounter, what form of suffering maybe that I'm going through, what life has thrown at us, at me? Do I have that tenacity to stick and follow Jesus no matter what? And quite honestly, as our world continues to turn upside down, will we hold true to Christ, or will we compromise? Bonhoeffer, he stood up against an evil regime of the Nazi Party, and he continued to have a desire, even in that whole situation, to see others come to Christ in a fullness of knowing Jesus at the risk of everything, as he traveled and ran that underground seminary. All the way to the very end, even from that testimony, he was submissive to what Jesus had asked of him. Jim Elliot, his desire was to see that lost tribe of the Auca Indians come to find Jesus as Lord, and even as his last breath was brutally snuffed from him, this was his desire. So how do we get to such a place that the things of this world and the things of our relationships that so often can distract us, right? The comfort that we have of our lives even become nothing compared to knowing Christ, and hear this, being known by Him. Knowing Christ, we know Christ, and Him knowing us. How do we do this? It doesn't just happen. It's that growing relationship with Jesus that begins to shape these things within. It's the fact that He begins to take priority in our own lives over everything in this life, even of life itself. We can't just will this to happen. We can't just say this is what we're going to do. It's something that only grows as we continue to love Jesus and continue to seek Jesus and allow the Holy Spirit to work within us. What is critical and really quite surprising by Jesus' teaching of the Beatitudes, the very structure of how He laid out the Beatitudes is for our hearts to change, for our destiny to be lived, for us to live the destiny that He has called us to and created for us found in the order of what Jesus taught. Each beatitude and each section, it builds upon one another. Without the first, the second can't happen. So let's look. When Jesus saw the crowds, He went on the mountain, and after He sat down, His disciples came to Him, and He opened His mouth, and He began to teach them, saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the gentle, for they shall inherit the earth." These first three Beatitudes here speak of some kind of really this holy emptiness. Blessed are the poor in spirit, those who realize how deficit our lives are without Jesus. Those who mourn over our sin, but also their needy condition. And then the gentle who hand over again and again their cause to God, their struggle to Him, knowing that only He can help. These first three are essential that we come to the end of ourselves before any real change can take place. One cannot happen without the other. So how poor are you really? Or have you and do you operate in a self-sufficiency and creating a mirage that even you believe? How much do you mourn over the choices of your past life, the results of the sinfulness? How much do we depend on God for truly every single need that we have? Because when we come to grips with these matters, a hunger begins to stir. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. These next Beatitudes, they're descriptions not of emptiness, but that of coming clean before God with the state of our hearts and our minds and a fullness that will then begin to take place. That spiritual hunger, it's just the beginning that leads to this overflowing of mercy given to others, seeking that only the pure heart could find God by the very power to make peace. But there's an interesting thing here. Take a look that the thirst is for righteousness. A desire that starts to serve God wholeheartedly, no matter what the cost or what changes he's asking, begins and must take place within us. The hungering, the thirsting for righteousness show itself in the results that follow. Because of that, our ways change in mercy. Our hearts begin seeking the things that are pure of him. We choose to then live in peace, choose to live in peace, and even be peacemakers with others as Jesus directs. And as these first Beatitudes are taken in, and as they begin to become part of our life, through the power of the Holy Spirit, the result becomes persecution. Persecution for following Jesus and doing everything that he asks of us. 4, look at the remaining Beatitudes. Blessed are those who have been persecuted for the sake of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you and persecute you and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward in heaven is great. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Let me tell you, we will never stand under any persecution if the first of the Beatitudes have not been embraced and become a part of our lives. And in fact, as you look at these now, until now, all the Beatitudes have been given really in the third person. Blessed are those. But note that verse 11 is blessed are you. Now Jesus is making it personal. The repetition of the Beatitudes and personalization and position at the end of the list tells us that it's supremely important for us and for the church. In fact, when there's the loom of adversity rises and individuals and the church has repeatedly woven persecution and joy into garments of praise because they were living the very first 10 verses to begin with. This persecution comes based on our hungering and thirsting for that righteousness. Why? Because our lives have changed. Our ways and our thinking have altered, not living the way that we once did. And note again, key statement in verse 11, the persecution is against you because of me, is what Jesus says. The changes that have led and been a part of your life that go completely contrary to the human nature that we all wrestle with is all because of Jesus' transformative work within us. And again I say, none of us will stand under any persecution if we are not living the Beatitudes, those first Beatitudes, and embracing them and making them part of our lives in our journey. And as our world continues to implode, the personal persecution is coming. Every single one of these Beatitudes is lived and found because of Jesus. Jesus said, I'm the vine, you are the branches. He who abides in me and I in him, he bears much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. Embracing mercy, becoming pure in our hearts, striving for that purity, changing towards working as a peacemaker is all done for the very honor of Jesus, and it's not going to be accomplished without him. or His Spirit working in us. More on point, our character changes to the core as these attributes are embraced. Our attachment to Jesus gives His righteousness to us that is a distinct character trait of that of a genuine follower. It's the fruit. There is no doubt this thought of persecution is tough. But here's what I want to remind each of us this morning. Your faith is at complete odds with the mindset of this world. Your faith is completely in opposition. Polar opposite. So what does that conflict or even the potential ground for persecution look like for even us? Oh, it's found within the marriages where one mate is not a faithful follower. This is found within the classroom where other students are at odds with your faith and embrace the life that this life has. This is found in the workplace where there's non-believers and those who play church but are only believers by name. This is found within family units, our heritage even, where the changes that Jesus has made within us goes completely against the dysfunction of the family. And this is found with adult children who have wandered to the far country of sin and you struggle with them. This is found in every single place imaginable. Anyone that is not with Christ as the transformations are taking place deep within us and are radiating out will be against those changes. As you change more and more into the likeness of Jesus in your love for Him, others are not going to understand or like it. Your faith stands in complete odds with this world's mindset. So no wonder that there's pushback and, yes, persecution and suffering. Indeed, all who desire to live godly in Christ Jesus will be persecuted. Paul's deep conviction here is that the very nature of our faith and the incredible changes that Jesus is making in us will go against the nature of humankind. There is such tension, a tangible tension between the message we live, the way of life for believers pursuing Jesus, and those who are nominal believers at best. Conflict is inevitable. So maybe we should begin looking at it that way. Many times, you see, we think of persecution like the story of Dietrich or of Jim Elliot, or those who across the globe are being persecuted to death today. But there are people, even maybe some sitting here, who have become so earnest in your seeking Jesus, you're facing your own form of persecution or suffering. The loss of people, of friendships, loved ones, because of your faithful obedience. You see, your change is upsetting other worlds. And so although you may not be facing physical death, you are facing the death and the loss of others in your life because of your commitment to Jesus. They're opposing you. They're saying false things about you. They're persecuting through mocking and insulting and maybe even being evil toward you. This is very real. If you pursue self-control, your life will indict those who are living in excess. If you are walking humbly with your God, you will expose the evil of pride in others. if you are a person who's punctual and thorough, you will lay open the inferiority of laziness and negligence. If you speak compassion in all that you do and how you respond, you will expose the very callousness of others. If you're earnest, you will show the flippancy people gravitate toward. If you're spiritually minded, you'll expose the worldly mindedness that has seeped into those around you. Do you have a bucket list? Bucket list is simply a list of things you want to do before you kick the bucket, I guess. I don't know how that works. I know a lot of people have these lists, and they still plot and they are planning on how to accomplish them before their life is over. I don't have one, have never honestly even considered it. But what I do have are things in my life I want to see change. I want to see accomplished. Because I want to be that person who, when encountered with hardship, radiates joy. And I don't do a very good job of that. And I want to be a person who hungers for His Word, that it just spills out through me, through my own words and my own actions. And I want to be a person who diligently follows and lays down everything that He's asking of me, even though it takes me sometimes more than a minute to agree to what He's asking. I want to be that person when others walk away, they say, man, I wish I loved Jesus like Him. I want that so much. I want to be that person who one day will stand before my God and hear Him say, you became everything I intended for you to be. That's what I want more than anything. And I have a very long way to go. Changing and becoming more like Christ should be all of our desires, our goals. A bucket list, possibly, yes, but what Jesus is stating here in the final Beatitudes is, we may not aim to experience persecution, but those who are part of the kingdom will, because the Spirit is changing us. You will be hated by all because of my name, but it is the one who has endured to the end who will be saved. Remember the word that I gave you. A slave is not greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they will also persecute you. If they kept my word, they will keep yours also. These things I have spoken to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation, but take courage. I've overcome the world. For to you it has been granted, for Christ's sake, not only to believe in Him, but to suffer for His sake. This is nothing more than a clashing of two kingdoms, the kingdom of God within you and the kingdom of this world. So if we are under the lordship of Jesus, the clash will come. His kingdom will continue to battle against the hierarchy of fallen man. And this clash is because of righteousness' sake. Early followers, they were charged with being immoral and atheists and enemies of the state. They were charged with being immoral because they kept talking about loving their brothers and sisters. They were charged with being atheists because they refused to worship the Roman gods. They were charged with being enemies of the state because they said Jesus, not Caesar, is Lord. Not one of these charges were true. And when you're persecuted, the charge may be something else, but you won't be charged with righteousness. You be accused of being intolerant and disloyal, and whatever else name they want to call it today. You see, the more that you are on mission to follow Jesus, the more persecution is coming to your doorstep. And Jesus gave fair warning of what is to come to any of his committed followers. And he's summoning us to live in the present in the way that makes sense towards the reward of heaven that awaits. Jesus is saying that we can live in line with the kingdom even when it leads to the clash with the rival kingdom itself. This reality is this place is not our home. This is not our home. We may live like it is, and we may love the world as we know it, but this simply is just a dot. It's a blip on the radar of eternity and what that looks like. Because what we gain through being captivated by Jesus is what awaits his faithful. This is what matters. This is what we must come back to when that persecution or suffering hits in unexpected ways. When we are suffering for the sake of Jesus, we are joining a long line of list of those who have risked everything for him. Do you even consider what it is a privilege to be accounted with these? Take note. What shall I say? For time will fail me if I tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, the prophets, who by faith they conquered kingdoms, they performed acts of righteousness, obtained promises, they shut the mouths of lions, they quenched the power of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, from weakness were made strong, and became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight. Women received back their dead by resurrection. Others were tortured, not accepting their release so that they might obtain a better resurrection. And others experienced mockings and scourgings, yes, also chains and imprisonment. They were stoned. They were sawn in two. They were tempted. They were put to death with the sword. They went about in sheepskins, in goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, ill-treated, men of whom the world was not worthy, wandering in deserts and mountains and caves and holes in the ground. And all these, having gained approval through their faith, did not receive what was promised because God had provided something better for us, so that apart from us they would be made perfect. This is the company we keep of those who have gone ahead of us and remained faithful to the very end. And this is the calling for each of our lives as we embrace and live the beatitudes. We cannot do this without the strength of the Spirit. And all of what we may endure, even though we may not see it here, is for his glory. And Jesus proclaims beyond a shadow of doubt that the reward in heaven, it's going to compensate even for the suffering we endure for his service. What did he say? Rejoice and be glad, for your reward in heaven is great. Oh, there's a mystery here. There's a mystery of joy in the midst of agony. And there's a mystery of gladness in the middle of misery and groaning. This mystery is contained in that miracle of faith and the bedrock of our assurance that heaven, it's worth it. And that we believe Jesus is worth it. To the very degree we believe what Jesus sees in heaven is the degree we will be able to endure and rejoice. And as he says, be glad in the sufferings and persecution. You see, persecution is not unusual. Our proper response is what Paul summed up in Corinthians: for our momentary light affliction is producing for us an eternal weight of glory far beyond all comparison. While we look not at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporal, but the things which are not are eternal. Are we pursuing the temporary or the eternal? The affliction we go through, the suffering that we endure, brings about an eternal weight of glory that we have yet to experience. So how poor of spirit are you? Have you mourned over your state before Christ? Have you become gentle in your dealing with others? What are the very things that you're hungering and thirsting for? Are you merciful? Pure in heart with all of your dealings? Have you made peace with Jesus? And are you pursuing peace with others? If our singers would come back up. There's a story told of Charles Spurgeon that at some point in his life became very stressful. And he went into a deep depression. And so his wife took a piece of paper and she wrote the Beatitudes on it in large print and then tacked it on the ceiling above his pillow where his head laid. She wanted the reality to saturate his mind in the morning when he woke up and as the last thing in the evening before he fell asleep. Everyone who lives righteously, everyone who is pursuing the things of Jesus will be persecuted. We will suffer. Jesus wills for us, his followers, to desire the reward of heaven more than the desire for the very reward of this earth. And Jesus wills for us to have our treasures stored in heaven, not here. And he wills for our hearts to be set to the end goal of eternity where they are primarily in heaven, our hopes in heaven and our longings and our joy for that. There is no other way we can rejoice and be glad at the loss of earthly joys. How can any of us rejoice and be glad these things are taken from us if we have not loved heaven more, if we're not pursuing Jesus more?